to my bottom line. What's in your wallet?
And we are back. In the 90s, there was Clinton derangement syndrome. Then we had Bush and Obama derangement syndromes back in the first 16 years of this century. And now we might be seeing Trump derangement syndrome. By that, we mean this: the feeling that no matter what the president does, the left or right, whoever's out of power, is alarmed, outraged, and distraught, and they're going to let you know no matter what. They're showing up at those town hall meetings we just talked about and holding demonstrations every weekend of the Trump presidency. But Democratic lawmakers are still trying to figure out how to capitalize on this new wave of leftist anger, if you want to call it that. So a Democratic strategy firm is trying to help them out. They did a new poll from its global strategy group, and they did a poll of both base Democrats and swing voting Democrats, trying to determine how to best harness this energy, and maybe more importantly, how to message it. Essentially, how do you go after Trump? To have a real shot at taking back control of Congress in 2018, Democrats will need to energize not only their base, but also pick up actual swing voters who could be turned off from President Trump. And this new poll tested how to do just that. And what they found is that it's about people, not politicians. How do the president's policies impact me and my family? It seems simple, but it is the opposite of what Hillary Clinton did in 2016 when it was all about character, 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 and all about Trump, the individual. Joining me now is Jeffrey Pollack, founding partner and president of Global Strategy Group, the Democratic research firm behind this new survey. Mr. Pollack, nice to see you, sir.
Thank you, Chuck.
So it was interesting. You had some different ways to do it. Let's do the baseline here. Is the intensity of different issues, the idea of what concerns you most about, and we'll go here on Trump's temperament, this first one. Trump's reckless approach could lead to war. That really resonated with Democratic swing voters here. Temperament to be Commander-in-Chief's first one up here. That was number 2. Works. No worry there. Base voters, 63. Swing voters, 57. We have another one about Trump's reckless approach could lead to war. Democratic base voters, 78%. Swing voters, 60. But it's a consistent gap in both of them between what the base almost views anything as evil doing.
That's right.
Swing voters, obviously a bit more tempered.
Yeah, but what they are worried about is recklessness, right? They are worried. There's this massive concern when you think about it, and even your own poll has some data on this as well from the NBC poll about sort of getting into war, that this is a guy who's going to be reckless enough to get us into war. The thing that Democrats need to remember when talking to swing voters, and what we forget too often, is it has to be about them, and the them is the voters. Too often we're talking about Donald Trump, the person, and he's going to profit, and the mysteriousness of Russia. Like, that's not what matters. What matters to the voters is how is this going to impact me? And war impacts me because the reckless policies could mean my sons and daughters going to war.
What struck me about the way Republicans went after Obama in 11 and 12, and what you're seeing early on right now, and really how the Clinton campaign went after Trump in 16 and what you're seeing early in 17, is that when you go after him as the person and you're trying to win over a swing voter, you forget the swing voter voted for that person.
Many of them, yes.
Yeah. So you're telling them, in a weird way, you're insulting their own judgment when you're criticizing them in that way, right?
Yeah, now, of course, we know that now because they voted for him. Our hope before going into the election was that they wouldn't, but many of them did, and so you can't do that, right? You can't say that your vote, your vote didn't matter, or you voted for this sort of nincompoop, even though that's what he is. You have to make it relevant to the voter in terms of what they care about. So when it comes to tax policy, for example, I know that Democratic colleagues are going to want to go nuts about tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. That's the wrong language. We need to talk about the fact that those tax cuts mean that the burden's going to be shifted to the middle class.
Well, it's interesting you do that. So let me put that up, because that's the wording you use. First, you did it on this. How do you frame tax policy? Concerned the GOP tax policy will burden the middle class, or concerned that the GOP tax policy takes taxes for millionaires and billionaires? It was a much more resonating message when you talked about the middle class.
That's right. And look at it, the swing voters and the base voters are actually identical, right? Because you talked about that gap on those other things. This is a place where there isn't a real gap on these things. And so tax policy is a place where, for example, we have to talk about that. Don't talk about millionaires and billionaires. Look, the same thing relates to his conflicts of interest. We all want to talk about this guy. He's got conflicts of interest. He's going to make lots of money. Again, that's the wrong thing. It's how do those conflicts of interest then relate to to me as a human being? What's the impact that it's going to be? So that those conflicts of interest could threaten my national security, or those conflicts of interest mean that big businesses are going to get tax breaks instead of me.
Let me put up the number 3 and number 4 here. Number 3, it has to do, you asked it this way. What concerns you more about President Trump? Trump's foreign policy will be driven by his business.
Yep.
That really upset swing voters here more than it did base voters. Then when you worded it this way, could lead to major corruption unlike anything we've ever seen. Sounds very Trumpian,
yes,
by saying it. Base voters loved that language. Swing voters,
not so much.
Less so.
Well, the other thing about swing voters that we know is that hyperbole isn't working with them anymore. They like Donald Trump in terms of the things that he would say he was speaking truth to power, but they still don't like hyperbole, things that are over the top. So talk about their values, talk about what matters to him. Don't talk about his lavish lifestyle. Don't talk about sort of money he can make. They don't care. They do care about what it means for them.
Very quickly, Russia. What concerns you more about President Trump? Dangerous alliance with Russia. This was not moving that many voters.
That's correct.
Just 31% of Dem-base voters, 35% of swing voters.
It's just not
That surprise
there.
you?
It does surprise me. And the reason that we think, and we don't know for sure, but Russia at this point is not seen as the kind of evil that ISIS and some of the other sort of threats that Americans feel sort of much more resonant about.
They've seen ISIS kill Americans.
ISIS. That's exactly right.
They haven't seen, they don't think Russian.
The Russian threat is distant.
Right.
And I think that that's real. And that doesn't mean that that's going to be the case for the next year, particularly as we explore all these sort of really crazy things that have gone on in terms of dealing with Russia. It may become more resonant, but I think that's why it is not as resonant today. And again, bring it back to the voters, not about sort of big mysterious things and what's going on in Russia. What does it mean to me?
Why is it that so many political parties never learn that lesson? When we've seen, I've shown the examples, there was an obsession on the right to get Clinton. There was an obsession on the left to get W. Frankly, look at liberals in the early 80s with Reagan. They got so caught up in the personality that they couldn't see the forest.
Because it's easy for us to get caught up into it. And by the way, having conversations with reporters is different than having a conversation with the voters. And the reporters, of course, are also much more interested, as they rightfully, in those character-based conversations. But when it comes to talking to the voters, which we'll get to in the midterms, and I think we're going to be able to take advantage of, that's when we better be focusing this language in the right way, Chuck.
All right. We shall see. There'll be a whole new DNC chair for you to pitch on this.
Indeed.
Apparently at the end of the week. Jeff Pollack, Democratic pollster, Global Strategy Group, very interesting.